Nicole Auerbach is NBC's leading college football insider. Prior to her current gig, she was a senior writer at The Athletic, a studio analyst for the Big Ten Network, and a radio host for Sirius XM. In 2021, she became the youngest ever winner of the National Sports Media Association's coveted National Sports Writer of the Year award. Nicole, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, happy to be here.
You know, the last 9 days, starting with the game in Dublin with Florida State and Georgia Tech, have been a bit of a whirlwind. All kinds of intriguing matchups and outcomes, but there were 3 games between ranked teams that loomed largest, I thought. Obviously, number 1 Georgia beat number 14 Clemson, number 7 Notre Dame beat number 20 Texas A&M, and number 23 USC beat number 13 LSU. What were your main takeaways from these games?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there were a lot of blowouts across the board over week 1 where we learned what we thought about different teams. But then like some of these results were really interesting. I mean, the fact that Miami could be back, the fact that Miami puts it together and like on paper coming into the season, you're saying, hey, this should be a contender. Like this could be an ACC favorite. This could be a college football playoff team. And then to actually see it come into fruition and to pull away at the Swamp, to see Cam Ward be capable of a Heisman Trophy campaign, like all of that was incredibly impressive, I thought. And really, you got to consider them the favorites in the ACC, especially with how FSU and Clemson started their seasons. And then I think a couple other main takeaways was that USC really does seem to be improved defensively. And boy, is Miller Moss good. I wasn't sure, right? Like, Lincoln Riley didn't go into the portal and get some high profile quarterback transfer. He went with the guy who's been there, who's been waiting in the wings, and he was phenomenal under pressure, especially down the stretch in that game against LSU. Other big takeaways, I mean, Georgia is Georgia. Like that is clearly, I think, the best team in college football until proven otherwise. Clemson was able to hang with them for a half, right? Defense is still really good, still got a lot of questions offensively for the Tigers, but Georgia just wears everybody down. They are so talented and so good. And they've always got somebody who can step up as a receiver. So it was just a really interesting opening weekend. I feel like we actually got some answers about some of these teams that we've been waiting to see if they were going to fix things or address things or take a next step forward, and they did.
Yeah. I'm kind of curious where you stand on this question. I asked Pat Forty a couple weeks ago and Tom Fornelli about the sort of, there's the extreme of going out and getting guys in the transfer portal and really relying on that. Everyone talks about Ohio State's huge efforts in the offseason. Oregon, of course, is continuously just bringing in players. And then you have other approaches where it's like maybe a mix of those two things. And then you have Dabo Swinney over there, not wanting to do as much NIL. And I think this seems to be two positions where some coaches are like, well, I want to build a team and I don't need to have buy all these players and I'm going to develop guys over time. And then there's these other programs that are just like, we're just going to try to get these guys in, plug them in and win now. And I thought, based on the first week, and obviously it's way too early to say for sure, but Oregon kind of struggled a bit. Ohio State got off to a slow start. And obviously Georgia pummeled Clemson, but USC, which has been taking more of the long-term approach, looked pretty good. Where do you stand on what's going to be the final outcome of this argument about which is the best way to run your program?
Well, I think it's probably going to include a good, healthy dose of the portal because it's such an important piece of roster construction because it allows you to address a weakness or deficiency quickly. Like that's where I think Clemson has really struggled is it's not like they need to be Colorado and like a full overhaul and use the portal, but they're not using it the way like some of the teams you're giving as examples.
Yeah.
They're not using it even the way Georgia used it this offseason, right? Like Florida State's been a great example the last couple of years because they've had a really high hit rate on the guys that they've brought in. But it's like supplements. It's like, oh, hey, we could use a really great receiver or we could use some depth in the receiver room. That's where we're going to go. Right. And meanwhile, Clemson, and I get that they think that they're still getting great high school recruits. Like they really trust that, but it's just not an immediate fix. So if you have issues in the receiving room, or maybe the quarterback was either misidentified or not developing the way that you want them to, it takes multiple years to get somebody to the position, to get them into your program, but then to be developing them or them in the weight room to be able to play and to be an impact player. where all of your competitors, at least at the top echelon of college football, they're fixing it faster. They're
Right.
addressing their needs faster. So to me, I think even if you have some of these slow starts or it takes a little while to break somebody into your offensive scheme or defensive scheme, it's still worth it
Yeah.
because this is something that the coaches identified an area of need and they're addressing it quickly and they know that it'll take a little bit to piece it together, but they trust in that process versus not addressing it or saying like we're going to address it next year or
Yeah.
in the next recruiting class. Like that's just
Yeah.
not how anyone else is operating at that top level of college football.
Right. And it's a whole new process because the coaches that can most quickly adapt these new guys into their program are going to be the ones that make it actually work the most, right?
Yeah. I mean, and that's why like I think Dan Lanning is such a good example of like where college football is today, like a great head coach example of that because he embraces all of that. They have one of the most enviable quarterback rooms in the country. They got two of those guys. They bring in Dalen Gabriel, most experienced. We've seen him go out and win games like Red River. Like we know a lot about him, and I trust that he is going to have a really good season at Oregon. He put up great numbers despite the score and despite the closeness and weirdness of that Idaho game. But they've also got Dante Moore waiting in the wings. So next year they're well positioned and they
Yeah.
actually have depth in that room, which is also really hard to do. But, he gets it. Like he gets what he needs to have from an NIL standpoint, a resource standpoint, how he wants to approach guys in the portal and also recruit at an incredibly high level out of high school. Like he embraces all of the things that we hear a lot of coaches complain about in
Right.
college football today. And
Yeah.
I think the portal is absolutely part of it. And you see the guys that embrace it or at least have honest conversations with the players that they're looking at. Those are the ones that are getting the best players out of the portal and putting them in positions to be impact guys.
Yeah. You mentioned USC earlier, but what other teams were way better than you thought they'd be, or looked way better than you thought they would be in week one?
Yeah, so Miami is number 1 in that category. Not just like it's just that I thought they could be really good and they actually showed it.
Yeah.
And Cam Ward was phenomenal, right? Like that the Cam Ward sweepstakes of where he was going to go in the offseason and when he if he was going to go to the NFL, like absolutely worth all the hype because he is that type of game changer. But I'm going to say Penn State. I thought that the Penn State offense, it's our first look of what they look like with head coach or offensive coordinator Andy Kotelnicki. That was a confident, explosive, and really productive offense. And we have been waiting a couple of years to see that. Like Drew Aller looked totally different. That's the best we've seen him. He was
Hmm.
emotional, but he just felt like he had command of an offense that could beat you in a lot of different ways. They were aggressive right before the half. They were going for the jugular. Like they were just doing things that we haven't seen because they've been so conservative the last few years. And the whole narrative around them last year was like, can they have a single explosive play? And you saw that they were really pushing it and they were really trying to control a game that way. I thought Penn State, West Virginia, I love that they play each other. I would love them and Pitt to just kind of like cycle through each other every single year because the regionalness of
Yeah.
those rivalries. I thought it would be a closer game than it was, and it just wasn't because Penn State really showed us something different. And I think, for a team that I think faces a lot of pressure in the first year of the 12-team playoff because they've been the poster child for this of like, hey, you would have been in this if this existed over the last
Yeah.
decade. I think there's a lot of pressure with that to make it this year. And this was, I think, maybe the best coordinator hire of the entire offseason cycle. And we're seeing that play out because I did wonder, hey, is he going to be able to do the stuff that we saw
Hmm.
him do at Kansas with
Yeah.
this roster, with this talent?
Yeah.
And I think you've got to be incredibly excited about what you saw from the Nittany Lions.
Yeah, there are definitely some major changes in the offseason that really showed the sense of urgency among some coaches. Flipping things around, what teams look worse than how you thought they'd be in week one?
Well, I mean, like the teams on the losing end of some of those marquee games, right? So, I think got to have the concerns about Clemson. We were just talking about them about an offense, quarterback, receivers that look average. Like we were used to not seeing
Yeah.
average players in that offense. They've had different coordinators, they've had different quarterbacks, and they still have the same kind of issues over multiple years. So I think you still got to have the alarm bells going off there. Florida, that was, just a really frustrating performance. I think not just because it's in-state rival that also needed to prove something, but the penalties, like the little things that you would think would be cleared up a couple years into a head coach's tenure. There's just nothing to be excited about. And I think that's what's really frustrating there. And the reason that the hot seat gets even hotter for Billy Napier is because of a performance like that it wasn't a competitive game, that Miami really like, and we saw the videos, right, of all the recruits, the Florida
Yeah.
recruits, like the Miami players, like dapping them up and being like, basically saying, hey, you should just come to Miami instead. That's like a terrible look. Like, that's just like,
Yeah.
salt in the wound. For Florida, and it was just a no good, very bad day for them. So I think that puts, obviously an even hotter seat under Napier. And then LSU, like, Brian Kelly pounded the table. We've all seen the clips of how angry he was after that game. But this is the third straight season opener he's lost at LSU. There were a couple even before that with Ed Ogeron. But, it's the way that they're losing these games that I think is really frustrating, because they're right there in them and they could win them if they could just get a couple stops. They could just complete a couple passes. And I think you had a lot that you liked out of Garrett Nussmeier. You saw defensive improvement on that side of the ball for them as well in this game. But for USC to win the game the way that they did, especially I think for it to be a touchdown when it looked like they were setting up to win on a field goal, I can see why Brian Kelly was so frustrated. But like, those are not the types of games that you should and could lose at LSU if you want to be a true national title contender. And they do, right? They wanted to fix the defense. They go out and they make Brian Baker the highest paid defensive coordinator. And then they have a game like this that's just, it was there for the grasping and they couldn't do it. I think that's really, really frustrating. And it's not going to get easier. I mean, these SEC and these Big Ten teams, the schedules are so much harder this year because of expansion and realignment. So, I think you've got to be very angsty and antsy if you're an LSU fan.
Yeah. Couple individual performances really stood out to me. Ashton Jeanty of Boise State, who, by the way, is one of the guests on this episode, ran for a school record 267 yards and 6 touchdowns. And then Tedero McMillan of Arizona caught 10 passes for 304 yards and 4 scores for Arizona. Obviously, these numbers came against lesser competition, but they were impressive nonetheless. I'm curious, do you think these kinds of opening statements help to put these two in the spotlight moving forward when it comes to talking about Heisman consideration?
Yeah, because you've got entire offenses that would have taken that stat line as like their entire offensive production for a game and been thrilled with it. Like that these are the kinds of performances, regardless of where they're played or the competition or what time of day, that like they stick with you and they keep you in the Heisman conversation, really all the individual award conversations for longer, because you become a household name if you get it, if you get brought up like this and you get highlighted. And all you need is the highlights literally of what we saw from these guys. I hope that did you get Ashton? Like, was that already locked in, or was he like, you're lucky to get in there in the on demand after the 6 touchdowns?
Well, it's funny. We've had a little knack here on the show of getting guys just before they blow up. We had Cam Ward on the show early last year. Obviously, Ashton Jeanty. We had Miller Moss on the last episode too. We actually were doing a segment on Moss and Nussmeier, the replacements, replacing the Heisman winners, and we couldn't get Nussmeier, but we did get Moss, and he won the game. So it's kind of an inside joke over here that if you come on the show, it's a little bit of good luck.
You should. So, can you tell me like your schedule for the coming weeks, just so I know what's about to happen in college football? That'd be really helpful.
I'll shoot you a text as soon as I find out.
But yeah, I mean, like those guys, I think it's awesome. And I would also so throw. I know it feels like it's been forever ago now, but Travis Hunter and what he did in Colorado's opener as a 2-way player. Like I just, me. I mean, I love guys that when we talk Heisman that are not just quarterbacks. Right. And I love when guys stay in the mix because they're incredible talents, but also defensive guys that are, doing an insane workload like Travis Hunter. But all the players that we've been talking about, they're all like must-see TV. I mean, I don't care what the score is in the game that they're playing because I just want to see what they might be capable of doing anytime the ball's in their hand.